"You're no soldier, just a beggar in a veteran's disguise." The words rang out in the bustling night market, under dozens of cold, unyielding stares. Caleb stood still, his hand trembling slightly on the lighter made from a bullet casing. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself, but deep in his eyes was an ocean of memories, where 42 people once called him the one who saved us, now forgotten by all. In that moment, he only wished, if only they knew what he had buried deep beneath that tattered coat. Before diving into a story that will keep you glued to the screen, I have a small request. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you love inspiring stories, and don't forget to leave a comment letting me know. Where are you watching from, and what time is it where you live? It always feels amazing to see the whole world come together just to share a meaningful moment.
Welcome to Veteran Best Stories, where the war ends, but the stories live on. From the foxholes to front porches, we honor the silent battles our veterans still fight. Subscribe and walk with us beyond the battlefield.
Caleb Morse didn't show up to be seen. He sat there as if he were just part of the city's backdrop, something people were used to, but never truly noticed. Every Friday evening, right on time, he set up his old wooden table on the edge of Asheville's night market, laying out a few items as quiet as the man himself. A lighter made from a bullet casing, a bracelet woven from paracord, a steel knife sharpened to a keen edge. He didn't call out to customers, didn't hawk his wares. He just bowed his head, hands wiping a tin cup so worn it was hard to tell how many seasons of wind it had weathered. There was something about his silence that unsettled people. Not his poverty, not his weathered appearance. It was the stillness that made others want to hurry past, as if they feared seeing something in his eyes they couldn't explain, or worse, didn't want to face. A child stared at him intently. The mother pulled her son along, not bothering to look back. "Don't stare, he's just homeless," she said like a reflex. And then a group of students passed by, their voices laced with a dull-edged mockery. "This guy's probably pretending to be a veteran for some pity cash." Their laughter rang out, hollow and safe, the kind of laugh people use to reassure themselves that what they don't understand doesn't matter. Caleb didn't respond, not because he didn't hear, but because he was too used to it. It was hard to know what he thought as he sat there. Perhaps he recalled the salty sting of seawater soaking into his skin while diving beneath a ship's hull. Maybe the face of a teammate who never made it back. Or simply the smoldering belief that staying silent was its own kind of loyalty. No one knew that the lighter had once warmed the hands of a child hiding in a cargo hold, that the paracord bracelet had been the last tool to keep a hatch sealed against flooding water. No one knew, and he didn't need them to, except for one person. At a bakery stall not far away, Lorraine, a Navy widow, watched quietly. She had never asked Caleb a single question, but her gaze was never one of pity. Each time she passed, she nodded to him as if greeting an old friend. Not from everyday life, but from a world where loyalty was measured in silence, not stories. Caleb always returned a slight look, no smile, but it was enough for anyone to know. He was still here, not to sell a few trinkets, but because there was something yet to be returned. It's just that no one had been still enough to notice the left sleeve of his jacket. And then one night, someone stopped. Not for the items, not out of curiosity, but because they had seen that tattoo somewhere else, a place no one dared name. And then one night, while Caleb was quietly wiping his tin cup as always, the autumn wind suddenly shifted, blowing hard and tugging lightly at his left elbow. The frayed fabric flipped up, curling back as if by accident, yet with purpose, revealing a patch of sun-weathered skin where a faded tattoo stood out. A rough, simple trident, unadorned. Below it, a line of small-ish characters, almost sinking into his flesh. OSC 044, Ocean Spear Class. Caleb didn't notice. It happened sometimes. He was used to the feeling, the fabric brushing against the wind, the faded ink exposed for a moment, then hidden again as if it had never appeared. No one noticed, no one asked, no one remembered. But this time someone stopped. The man had just bought bread at a nearby stall. He wasn't looking at the items in his hand, nor was he hurrying along like the rest of the crowd. His body froze, his eyes locking onto that tattoo. For a few seconds, all movement seemed to stop. Only that gaze, cutting through time, through the fading, fixed firmly on a mark he thought had vanished with a piece of history no one dared name. He didn't call out, didn't say anything right away. He just stepped forward slowly, each step like retracing an old path where the waves had stopped roaring, but the memory still surged whenever someone struck the right chord. Caleb looked up, not quickly, not startled. It was as if he'd sensed the presence before the first footstep sounded. His eyes met the man's, a look that needed no introduction, no explanation. Time for a moment became meaningless. A nod, slow, deliberate, was the confirmation that needed no words. The man took a short breath. Then he spoke Caleb's name, as if touching a gravestone freshly cleared of dust. Caleb Morse. Silence, but not a cold silence. It was the pause of recognition, of a memory rekindled, of something only those who'd stood at the edge of life and death could understand. Caleb nodded slightly. His voice was soft, but carried enough weight to reach the deepest part of the man's mind. I remember your signal light from the deck of the Hamilton. That sentence was like a small spark, touching a powder keg that had gathered dust for nearly 2 decades in the man's mind. Retired Colonel Daniel Rourke. He didn't speak right away. He only placed his hand on Caleb's shoulder. A light grip, not overly familiar, but enough to convey what words couldn't. In his eyes, a memory flickered, not clear, but vivid. A ship tilting in a storm, the supply system in shambles, water flooding the engine room, and someone, name unknown, face unseen, diving to the bottom, sealing a line with their own arm. A person who wasn't recorded in the logs, a person who vanished as soon as the ship escaped the maelstrom. That person was called Ghost Diver, a legend whispered in training classes, a quiet reminder among those who dived deep, deeper than allowed, deeper than records permitted mention. No one knew your name, Daniel whispered, his eyes still fixed on Caleb. No one until now. No one around heard their conversation. To outsiders, it was just a reunion of 2 old soldiers. But between those 2 men, something had shifted. Not pride, not joy, but the feeling that, at last, a piece of the truth had been named, even if in the softest of tones. Caleb didn't say more. He had never told that story to anyone. Not out of fear, not out of pain, but because he never thought it needed telling. What he did, he saw as duty. What he lost, he accepted as part of his choice. But that touch, that look, and someone calling him by the name history had forgotten, stirred a strange, quiet note in his heart. Not to be remembered, but to be seen just once as he truly had been. And right then, another gaze from the crowd suddenly turned toward them. Someone began to notice. Not yet sure what was happening, but their eyes had changed. No longer a dismissive glance, but a quiet, questioning pause. A faded tattoo had just pulled an entire memory back to life. And that was only the beginning. They only meant to pause for a few seconds. The market goers, the strangers casually passing by the nameless face, the children clutching hot donuts, all intended to glance briefly as always. But this time something slowed their steps, as if the air around that phone booth corner had shifted, as if the autumn wind had paused for a moment to listen to what was about to be said. Colonel Rourke didn't need to think long. He had carried that silence for too long. Some things, though unasked, had to be spoken because they had weighed on his heart for far too long. He turned slowly without drama or flair. His gaze settled on the crowd beginning to gather, those who had laughed, who had been indifferent, who had passed by the man in the tattered coat without ever asking his name. He didn't raise his voice, but each word rang out, cutting through the quiet of the market street. "This man," he said, pausing for just a beat, long enough for every eye to turn toward Caleb, dived alone into the hold of the Stokes during Hurricane Linda. The ship was tilting nearly 40 degrees. The fuel system was shattered. The engine room was flooding with salt water and oil. No one dared go down. No one had enough equipment, but he went down. Caleb stood there, neither denying nor confirming. Only his eyes, now a little brighter, gazed into the distance as if seeing that moment again. Rourke continued, slower this time, as if each word carried the image of that brutal night years ago. He sealed the line with his hands, jammed paracord into a leaking pressure valve, held it with his own arm for nearly 4 minutes. And then, Joe, when the system came back online, he disappeared. Took no payment, no medal, left no name. The people around began to shift their gazes. Doubt melted away. In its place was unease, unspoken questions, the kind of silence that only sudden regret can create. In the far corner, a boy, the son of a wooden toy vendor, pulled out his phone, recording the moment. Not because he understood it all, but because he felt something was happening. A story no one had told, and he, though young, didn't want it to be lost again. The video lasted less than a minute, a simple scene. An old man pointing at a silent man, recounting something that seemed buried forever. But the strange thing about social media isn't the quality of the footage. It's the truth. When spoken at the right time, in the right place, to the right person, it can spread like fire through dry grass. Within hours, the clip was shared on an account dedicated to military history with a short caption, "We found him, #GhostDiver." By morning, the hashtag had climbed to the top trends, and the name Caleb Morse, forgotten from records for nearly 2 decades, began to reappear on people's lips. Back in Asheville's small square, where it all began, Caleb's expression didn't change. But in his hand, the hand that once jammed paracord under the Stokes hull, there was a slight tremor. Not from fear, not from worry, but because he felt what he had quietly preserved all those years had finally been touched by truth, not pity. And that night, for the first time, Caleb wasn't just a shadow on the street's edge. He was a truth named aloud, under the gaze of a community that had once forgotten. Dear audience, take a moment to relax or grab a glass of water. Then keep listening to the story. There are still surprises ahead. Comment 1 if you're enjoying the story so we know you're still with us. A week later, just as the night market seemed to settle back into its usual rhythm, the appearance of 2 men in Navy uniforms on the cobblestone path immediately drew every eye. They didn't hurry, nor did they seek attention, but there was something in their stride, decisive, orderly, carrying the quiet weight of duty, that hushed the crowd. They stopped before the old wooden table where Caleb Morse sat. As always, the tattered coat was still there, the handmade items neatly arranged. To an outsider, nothing had changed. But Caleb's eyes, when they caught the silhouettes of the 2 officers, tightened slightly. Not in surprise, but as if something he'd long awaited had arrived, though he hadn't asked for it. Without a word, they placed a file in an old plastic cover on the table. Its top edge was singed, some pages inside yellowed, stained with water at the corners. One of the officers opened it, flipping through the pages as if unearthing a piece of history they weren't sure they'd find. His name was there, not a letter out of place, Caleb J. Morse. Below it, a nomination note for the Navy and Marine Corps Medal, dated February 17, 2005. The next page was an incomplete report, parts redacted in black. At the bottom, a small annotation, Operation Ghost Current, level red clearance, not for release. They didn't need to explain much. The numbers, the code names, the redacted lines, all were merely proof of one simple truth. Caleb had never been forgotten by his comrades, but the system had placed him in a zone of silence. When he left the base, he left no address, no contact, no response. And because his file was classified, his name, like hundreds of others from missions that bore no medals, was marked inactive due to loss of contact. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was a form of reverence, as if everything that could be said was already in their eyes. Caleb lightly flipped through a few pages, his calloused fingers brushing over the typed words of his own story from 19 years ago. For a moment, he seemed to see himself again, drenched in oil, tying paracord with his teeth in freezing water, holding a pressure valve with bare hands amid the creaking of the ship's hull. He smiled, not a sad smile, nor one of regret, just a hint of relief, as if, at last, the map had pointed back to its starting point. "No one needed to know," he said, his voice low and steady. "I just kept my oath." One of the officers gave a slight nod. No promises, no formal invitations, no camera flashes. They hadn't come to honor him, but to return a piece of the truth, a piece the system had misfiled, but one his comrades' memories had never forgotten. The file closed. They left without ceremony. They left only a small copy on the table, as if handing Caleb the right to hold on to himself, this time without anonymity. That night, the market wasn't as noisy as usual. Some who passed his table lingered longer than normal. Some glanced at the file, then at him, asking nothing. But their eyes had changed. No longer doubt, no longer pity. Instead, a quiet respect, very American. The respect for someone who chose silence when they could have spoken and never demanded to be remembered. And in that stillness, for the first time in years, Caleb sat there. No longer a forgotten shadow, but himself, a vow that had never lost its mark. The afternoon drifted slowly in Asheville, but no one in the town could call it an ordinary day. The small square, once a place for selling baked goods, listening to street music, and passing each other with indifference, was now tidied neatly. No flags, no drums, no high stage, no LED screens, no opening music. Just a small wooden platform, a simple microphone, and a few rows of chairs for those who arrived early. Caleb sat in the back row. He didn't like being the center of attention. The tattered old coat was still on his shoulders, as much a part of him as ever, despite the many eyes that now saw him differently. His dusty leather boots remained, and his hands, as always, held their own quiet. He had never expected this day. But when it came, he didn't refuse it. Beside him sat Lorraine, silent and upright. In front were faces that had passed him by for years without a greeting. Now they sat there, not to apologize, not to make amends, but to listen. Colonel Rourke spoke first, not with an introduction, but with a gaze that lingered across the square. In his old but neatly pressed uniform, he didn't stand as a commander, but as a friend, a witness. He didn't deliver a speech. He simply said, in a low voice, that sometimes soldiers don't need titles to deserve respect. That honor in its purest form often comes from choosing silence when one could have spoken. Then he passed the microphone to another voice, softer but carrying a different weight. The girl who had recorded the moment when Caleb was recognized now stood there in a simple wool jacket, her hair tied back like any schoolgirl in town. But when she held the paper, no one thought her a child. Her voice was slow, steady, unhurried. We don't honor him because he dove into the tilting hold of a ship in a storm. Not because he saved 42 lives. Not because he was nominated for a medal the system forgot. We honor him because he chose silence for 19 years, never demanding, never claiming credit, never angry. And tonight, Asheville apologizes to him for looking but not seeing, for hearing but not listening. No one clapped, not because they weren't moved, but because silence is sometimes the deepest form of respect. And in that moment, the stillness spread like a wave through each row of chairs, each gaze, each breath held back in the late afternoon. Then every eye turned to a new brass plaque mounted on the old brick wall, where just a month ago people had whispered mockery about a tattered coat. The inscription was brief, unembellished. Here, Caleb Morris was once mocked for his tattered coat. Now we bow our heads for his unspoken loyalty. Caleb didn't stand. He didn't bow his head. He just looked at the plaque for a long time, as if reading over and over something that never needed to be said. Dust began to swirl lightly as the wind blew through. A younger child approached, placing a paracord bracelet on the wooden platform, the kind Caleb sold every Friday night. No one prompted Caleb to speak, and he didn't offer to, because that ceremony needed no response, because his silence was already the answer. A year passed, and people still spoke of the name no one had remembered for 19 years. At the Norfolk Naval History Museum, a new exhibit opened in solemn silence. It wasn't to honor medals or celebrate feats recorded with names and ranks. The exhibit bore a simple, almost vague title for those unfamiliar with military life: the Nameless Missions. Visitors could walk past hundreds of artifacts, uniforms, tactical maps, medals gleaming behind thick glass. But in the left corner, at the deepest end, where the lights were dimmed to preserve a sense of solemnity, hung a faded coat with a small tear at the left shoulder. Under the soft light, the tear was left unsewn. It revealed a faded Trident tattoo still bearing the rough lines of a soldier's hand. No accompanying insignia, no battle scene diorama, just a piece of fabric and a symbol, powerful enough to evoke an entire mission, never made public. Beneath the glass lay an old journal, its pages yellowed, leather cover peeling, handwriting uneven. It was open to a single page, where a line written in blue ink held a simple yet profound philosophy. If I don't return, tell them. I chose to stay not to be remembered, but to keep others alive. No one read it without pausing a little longer in silence. Caleb Morse's story didn't end within the museum's walls. After the quiet honoring ceremony in Asheville, a group of instructors at the Naval Officer School proposed including his story in the curriculum, part of a module on honor and duty. Not to inspire superficially, but to teach young officers that some missions never make headlines, yet are etched in the memories of those who survived. The original clip, the moment Caleb was recognized at the night market, continued to spread. It had no dramatic soundtrack, no professional editing, but every glance, every word spoken in that footage was enough to make viewers pause, share, and reflect. After a year, it surpassed 48 million views, not because of algorithms, but because of its raw truth. The girl who recorded that moment was now in her final year of high school. Awarded a scholarship from the National Veterans Foundation, she stood at her spring graduation and spoke before the entire school. Without notes, without rehearsal, she spoke in a soft but weighty voice. I didn't just meet a hero. I met a mirror for all of America, a man who taught me that silence can be a way to preserve what's most precious. Not to be praised, but to protect others through humility itself. The applause wasn't loud, but it was sincere. In Asheville, the old wooden table where Caleb once sat was no longer set up every Friday night. But a few children still came, playing in the square and telling their friends about a man who sat there, selling paracord bracelets, and was remembered by a nation for living as if he didn't need to be remembered. Caleb's legacy wasn't in the coat or the brass plaque. It was in what he left for the next generation. That loyalty doesn't always need to be carved in stone. It only needs to be seen by someone and kept, like a whisper in the heart. Some spend their lives seeking recognition, while others spend theirs in silence, not because they have nothing to say now, but because they believe what's right doesn't need to be celebrated. Caleb Morse was a quiet testament to the deepest value of loyalty, keeping an oath, even when no one hears it. And perhaps in each of us, there's a piece of Caleb, the part that quietly struggles, quietly sacrifices, quietly holds to what's right, even when the world doesn't see. If you carry an untold story, a pain ignored, or a deed unrecognized, remember, value doesn't lie in the spotlight, but in the kindness preserved through the years. Thank you for staying with today's story. If it touched you, please share this video to spread the spirit of unsung heroes. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Where are you watching from, and who is the quiet hero in your life?